The schoolyard pulsed with energy as the final bell echoed across cracked concrete and sun-bleached fences. Teenagers spilled out of Pine Grove High like a dam broken, shouting, laughing, jostling backpacks as they made their way toward the gates. But not all laughter is innocent, and not all eyes are kind. Near the edge of the grounds, where a faded chain-link fence met a patch of dry grass, a lone German shepherd sat in the shade. Muscular, quiet, still. His ears twitched, tracking every sound. His eyes were sharp, too sharp for a school pet. He wore no smile, no wagging tail, just focus, shadow. A group of boys broke away from the crowd and made their way toward the fence. The leader, tall and cocky with a basketball jersey hanging off his shoulder, tossed a pebble toward the dog. It bounced off the ground harmlessly. But the next one wasn't harmless. It hit Shadow's paw. "Ooh," one of them sneered. He didn't like that. "Maybe he's broken." The others laughed. Another boy mimicked a bark and waved his arms. "Hey, doggy! Woof! Come on, do something!" Shadow didn't move. Not a twitch. He sat like a statue, only his eyes following the taunts. Eyes that had seen far worse than this. From across the lot, Noah watched. 16. Quiet. Not the kind of kid who usually got involved in anything loud or messy. But this hit a nerve. He knew Shadow. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a veteran, a police K-9 who had once served on patrols with Uncle Mark before retiring due to a leg injury, minor, but enough to earn him a quieter post. Now he was Noah's companion, protector, partner. And right now, those boys didn't know how close they were to waking a sleeping weapon. One of them picked up a stick, grinning. "Let's see if he likes fetch." Noah moved without thinking. "Don't," he said sharply. The group turned, surprised. The kid with the stick smirked. "What, this your dog or something?" "Yeah," Noah replied, "and he's trained to take down armed suspects in under 4 seconds." A pause. The stick lowered just a bit. "He's just sitting there," another muttered. "Because I haven't said the word." Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of Noah's voice. He didn't growl, he didn't lunge, but his posture shifted, just enough for anyone paying attention to feel it in their gut. The leader scoffed, "Whatever, freak." But he backed off, slowly. The others followed. Then came the voice that ended it all. "Hey!" Coach Jennings' voice sliced through the noise like a whip. He stormed across the field like a locomotive in human form, whistle bouncing against his chest, clipboard in hand. "You boys find some trouble to dig your heads into?" The boys froze. Coach Jennings pointed at the group, then at Noah, then at the dog. "What's going on here?" Noah stepped forward. They were taunting him, throwing stuff. The coach turned his gaze to Shadow, who sat perfectly still beside the fence. Not a hair out of place, his expression unreadable yet deeply aware. "Is that Mark Leland's dog?" Jennings asked. Noah nodded. The coach's face softened for a split second. "That dog once tracked a missing kid through 5 miles of swamp. He deserves better than this." He turned back to the boys. "Run now." They didn't argue. The principal's office was never meant to feel like an interrogation room, but today it came close. Noah sat stiffly in the visitor's chair, his hands fidgeting in his lap. His sneakers squeaked once against the polished tile, then fell still. Behind the large oak desk, Principal Harris leaned back, the sunlight from the blinds casting striped shadows across his tired face. His office smelled faintly of paper, lemon polish, and barely contained frustration. At Noah's feet, Shadow lay still, alert but calm. His ears twitched at every sound in the hallway beyond the door, his gaze never straying from the principal. It wasn't defiance, it was duty. "So let me get this straight. Principal Harris began, removing his glasses and setting them on the desk. You brought a former police dog, fully trained in tactical takedowns, onto school property and left him tied up during class hours. He wasn't a threat to anyone, Noah replied evenly. He's retired, mostly. The principal raised an eyebrow. Mostly doesn't sound reassuring, Mr. Leland. He only reacts if provoked, Noah said. And today he was. The door opened. Coach Jennings stepped in, arms crossed, brows furrowed. It wasn't Noah's fault, he said without being asked. Those boys were throwing things at the dog. Shadow didn't move a muscle until Noah stepped in. Principal Harris rubbed the bridge of his nose. I'm not trying to assign blame. I'm trying to prevent a lawsuit. If that dog had bitten one of those kids, he wouldn't have, Noah interrupted more firmly than he expected. He's trained better than most adults I know. The silence in the room settled like dust. Shadow shifted slightly but remained in place, muscles taut but under control, a living sculpture of discipline. Coach Jennings softened. You should have seen him, sitting there while they pushed him. If anything, he showed more restraint than half the staff would have. Principal Harris let out a slow breath. This town's already buzzing about the cop dog at the high school. Good, Noah muttered. Let them buzz. The principal raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Outside, the late afternoon sun hung heavy in the sky. The parking lot shimmered with heat waves, and the buzz of insects filled the stillness as Noah walked toward the curb. Shadow padded beside him, his steps precise and steady. No limp, no hesitation. He looked like he was still on patrol, still waiting for something to happen. The black and white cruiser pulled up, and Uncle Mark stepped out, short-sleeved uniform creased to perfection, badge gleaming under the sun. His presence had weight, the kind that made people straighten their posture without realizing it. How'd it go? He asked. Noah shrugged, scratching behind Shadow's ear. Got a lecture, but Coach backed me up. Said Shadow handled it better than most humans. Mark looked down at the dog and smiled. Sounds about right. They climbed into the car. Shadow took his usual place in the back, eyes scanning the road like a sentinel. As they pulled away, Uncle Mark glanced at his nephew. You okay? Noah looked out the window. Yeah, just tired of people assuming he's dangerous. Mark nodded, his voice quiet. The more capable you are, the more people fear you. That goes for dogs too. They rode in silence for a moment, the cruiser humming along the road like a lullaby. Then Mark added, You did right by him today. Noah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Shadow's steady breathing behind them was all the proof he needed. Evening in the suburbs had its own kind of silence. It wasn't the hush of the countryside or the buzz of the city. It was the quiet lull of a neighborhood settling into its routines. Lawn mowers stopped grumbling. Porch lights flicked on. Garage doors sighed shut. Somewhere in the distance, a basketball thudded against pavement. A car alarm chirped once and went still. Inside the modest two-story home at the end of Alder Lane, Shadow lay curled at the foot of the couch, his breathing slow but alert. His eyes were open, tracking shadows on the wall as headlights passed by the window. Noah sat on the armrest, flipping through a worn photo album that smelled faintly of leather and time. One photo caught his attention. Uncle Mark in uniform, younger, but still carrying that same unshakable presence. Kneeling beside him was a leaner, smaller version of Shadow, barely more than a pup, ears too big for his head, eyes already locked onto the camera like it owed him answers. Look at you, Noah murmured, turning the album so Shadow could see it. You were already a soldier before you had your name. Shadow didn't move, but his tail gave a slow thump on the floor. Noah smiled. From the kitchen, The sound of drawers opening and closing echoed softly. Uncle Mark was making dinner the same way he always did. Methodical, efficient, quiet, but tonight felt off, not wrong, just still. The landline rang, an oddity in a house that rarely used it. Uncle Mark answered, his voice shifting immediately into cop mode. Direct, clipped, professional. Leland here. Yeah, 2 blocks from us. A pause, his brow furrowed. Entry point. Noah leaned around the corner, his heart starting to beat just a little faster. Uncle Mark met his eyes and gave a reassuring nod. Just a heads up from dispatch. Nothing to worry about. Some punk tried to break into a place near the old Walker residence, got scared off by the alarm. But Shadow was already up, his body low, ears stiff, pacing to the window. He stopped, staring at the street. A soft growl hummed in his chest. Not aggression, but awareness. Noah joined him, pulling the curtain aside. Nothing but trees, fences, and a flickering street lamp. Still, Shadow didn't move. Later that night, the house dimmed. Uncle Mark turned in early, radio by his nightstand, holstered pistol on the dresser. Noah stayed up, pretending to scroll through his phone, but really, he was just listening, waiting. Shadow lay beside the door, tail wrapped around his paws, head up, not sleeping, just watching. Around midnight, Noah finally went to bed. The house fell into that deep silence only known to quiet neighborhoods and those who lurk in them. A soft creak, barely audible. Noah stirred, eyes blinking open in the darkness. At first he thought he'd dreamt it, but then he heard it again, a gentle click, like a window lock easing open. He sat up slowly. His hand reached for the flashlight under his bed, but a low growl from down the hall stopped him. Shadow. Noah rose and crept out of his room barefoot, heart pounding. Shadow stood at the end of the hallway like a statue carved from fear itself. No barking, no lunging, just that low rumble vibrating the air. Something was wrong. Noah's fingers trembled as he unlocked his phone and whispered into the screen, "There's someone in the house." He moved one step closer to Shadow. The growl deepened. Then came the sound of a door opening downstairs. Noah pressed his back to the wall, heart thudding like a war drum in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide. But Shadow was already moving. The German Shepherd glided across the hardwood floor without a sound, muscles coiled, body low, eyes trained on the bottom of the stairs. His breathing was silent, calculated, lethal. The creak came again, closer now. The unmistakable groan of a weight settling on floorboards. Someone was in the house. Noah leaned over the railing just enough to glimpse the living room below, bathed in shadows. The front door was still locked. The alarm was off. But the window above the kitchen sink, it was open. Just a crack. Enough. A figure moved beneath the shadows, dressed in black, hoodie pulled up, gloves on. The man moved like someone who had done this before, quiet, confident, relaxed. He had a flashlight, the beam darting over shelves and furniture like a tongue of light. He didn't see Shadow. Not yet. The burglar reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A crowbar. He held it loosely at his side, more as a tool than a weapon. He was scanning for valuables. Unconcerned. Noah's hand hovered over the banister. One wrong step and the floor would creak. One wrong move and the intruder would panic. But it didn't matter. Shadow was already descending the stairs, one step at a time without so much as a whisper. His eyes never left the man. His tail was stiff, ears forward. This was not a pet. This was a soldier. Then the flashlight turned. They saw each other. The man froze. Shadow growled, not the kind of growl that threatened, the kind that promised. The intruder raised the crowbar, not to attack, but to protect himself. Shadow lunged. The two collided in a storm of motion and noise. The crowbar clanged to the floor. The man shouted, a cry of surprise more than pain. Shadow tackled him to the ground, pinning him with precision, teeth bared but not biting. One paw on the man's chest. No blood, no chaos, just perfect, practiced control. Noah stumbled down the stairs, breath caught in his throat. He grabbed the phone again. "Now, officers are en route," the operator replied calmly. "Stay on the line." But Noah was already tossing the phone to the couch and grabbing Uncle Mark's backup flashlight from the drawer. He clicked it on and aimed it at the intruder. The man was on his back, breathing hard, Shadow's growl inches from his face. "Don't move," Noah said, his voice steadier than he felt. "He won't bite unless I tell him to." The man didn't move. A moment later, heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. "Noah?" Uncle Mark, half-dressed and armed, appeared like a force of nature. He took in the scene in one glance. The broken window, the crowbar, the intruder, and Shadow standing like a stone sentry. "Shadow, stand down!" Shadow stepped back instantly, retreating to Noah's side. He didn't take his eyes off the man, not once. Mark holstered his weapon and moved in, flipping the burglar onto his stomach, zip-tying his wrists with practiced ease. "Gotcha," he muttered. "You picked the wrong house, friend." The sound of sirens arrived moments later, blue and red lights flashing like lightning across the neighborhood. Police cruisers skidded to a stop. Officers poured out, weapons ready, only to find the intruder already neutralized. One officer blinked. "Wait. The dog caught him?" Noah, still breathless, nodded. Shadow held him without biting, just like he was trained to. Another officer knelt beside the dog, staring in awe. "This one used to serve, right?" "He still does," Uncle Mark said quietly. By sunrise, the story had spread like wildfire. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes spinning skyward. Reporters clutched microphones, pointing toward the two-story house at the end of Alder Lane. Flashbulbs popped. Neighbors stood behind yellow police tape, whispering. Some clutched coffee mugs, others held their children close. At the center of it all, Noah sat on the front steps of his home. Shadow rested at his feet, still and calm, tongue lolling slightly as the morning heat began to rise. Despite the chaos, the dog didn't seem fazed. If anything, he looked bored. Uncle Mark stood by the cruiser, giving his third statement of the hour. "Yes, Shadow was once on the force. Yes, he's retired, but he still responds to commands. And no," he added, raising a hand to silence another question, "he did not bite the suspect. He pinned him, that's all." One reporter, younger and eager, leaned forward. "Is it true your nephew gave the order?" Uncle Mark glanced toward Noah. "It's true that my nephew handled himself like a professional. He followed protocol. He stayed calm, and he trusted his partner." Noah looked away, trying to avoid the cameras. He didn't want attention. Not really. What he wanted was to take Shadow out to the field behind the school and throw a ball until his arm hurt. But that version of normal felt distant now, out of reach. By the time they arrived at school the next morning, everything had changed. Students stood in clusters whispering. A few pointed. Some clapped as Noah walked past. Others looked away, embarrassed by what they'd once said. A few even offered awkward fist bumps. Shadow walked beside him, head high, steps measured. Not aggressive, not aloof, just present. Principal Harris stood at the top of the front steps, like a commander waiting for a parade. His usual stern face had softened just a bit. "Noah," he said, nodding. "Good to see you." Noah didn't know how to respond. "I didn't mean for all this attention." Harris raised a hand. "Don't apologize. This school could use more examples of courage and restraint. You showed both." He looked down at Shadow and surprisingly offered his hand. Shadow sniffed it once, then allowed a brief pat on the head. "Tell your uncle," Harris added, "that if Shadow ever wants to visit for an assembly, the door's open." Noah nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. Later that afternoon, they were invited to speak at the annual County Hero Day, a ceremony usually reserved for firefighters, medics, and high-ranking officers. Noah felt completely out of place in his buttoned-up shirt, standing behind a podium with hundreds of eyes on him. Uncle Mark introduced them. "This is my nephew Noah, and this," he said, resting a hand on the German Shepherd beside him, "is Shadow." They reminded us all this week that courage doesn't always come with age or rank. Sometimes it comes quietly. It waits for the moment it's needed, and when it arrives, it doesn't flinch. The applause that followed was thunderous. Kids lined up afterward to pet Shadow. Some were still afraid, but most were just curious. Shadow handled it all with a calm that Noah couldn't quite understand. It was like nothing rattled him. Not the noise, not the people, not the questions. That night back at home, Noah sat beside Shadow on the front porch. The stars blinked above. The cicadas buzzed. "I think you're officially famous," Noah whispered. Shadow didn't respond. He just leaned into the boy's side and let out a long, slow breath, like he was finally ready to rest. The days that followed were quieter. The neighborhood began to settle like the surface of a pond, slowly smoothing after a stone had been thrown. But something beneath the surface remained alert, watchful. In the backyard, the grass had turned gold under the late summer sun. The fence creaked in the breeze, and birds chirped from the wires overhead. The world, on the surface, looked normal again. But for Noah, something had shifted. In him, around him. He sat cross-legged in the yard, tossing a tennis ball lazily from one hand to the other. Shadow lay beside him, head resting on his front paws, eyes closed but not asleep. Even in rest, there was readiness. "You ever get tired of being on guard?" Noah asked, not really expecting an answer. Shadow didn't move. "I mean, it's okay to relax now. We're safe. Everything's fine." Noah tossed the ball. Shadow didn't chase it. He didn't need to. His ears twitched at the sound, but his body remained still, coiled beneath a calm surface. Uncle Mark stood at the edge of the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the two with quiet pride. He'd seen it before. Officers who'd served too long, who never quite came off duty even when they were home. Shadow was no different. Retired on paper, active in spirit. Later that evening, Noah walked into the kitchen and paused by the fridge, his finger tracing a magnet that held a crumpled article torn from the local paper. Teen and K-9 foil break-in in suburban standoff. He shook his head and muttered, "Should have written best boy stops bad guy." He smiled faintly, but the smile faded just a little. He could still hear the sound of footsteps on hardwood, the click of a window, the growl. Sometimes when it got really quiet, he could hear it all again. He wandered to the living room and found Shadow by the front door, lying in his usual spot. He looked peaceful, but Noah knew better now. Shadow didn't sleep deeply. "Not anymore. You're still on watch, huh?" he whispered, sinking down beside him. Shadow blinked once and gently rested his head against Noah's thigh. It was his way of saying, "I'm here. You're okay." They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the neighborhood in soft orange and blue hues. Porch lights flicked on one by one. Sprinklers hissed to life down the street. Somewhere, a garage door groaned closed. Noah felt it first. Something small, insignificant, maybe nothing at all. A creak on the sidewalk. Shadow's ears perked, his body lifted just slightly. Noah froze. Outside, a figure walked past. Just a jogger. Nothing strange. Nothing threatening. But Shadow watched him until he was out of sight. And even after. That's when Noah realized something important. Shadow didn't believe in safe. Not really. He believed in ready. And somehow that made Noah feel safer than anything else ever could. The house remained quiet that night, but Shadow stayed by the door, because for him the job wasn't over. Not yet, maybe not ever.